The following program was recorded on an earlier date for presentation at this time.
Imagine waking up on a frigid winter morning shivering because David Crosswith hasn't invented heating. And guess what? You're late because Benjamin Bacon hasn't invented the clock. Going downstairs to have some toast, but you can't add your peanut butter on there because George Washington Carver hasn't invented that either. These are just 3 inventions that we use every day that are made by African American inventors. Things that we use on a daily, things that we simply can't live without, were primarily made by African American inventors. I was personally curious on how much PAX knows about things that we use every day were made by African American inventors. Let's go see what they know.
Okay.
Who invented peanut butter?
I actually do know this one. My dad told me a while ago. George Washington Carver, not Carver.
George Washington Carver.
That's George Washington Carver.
Carver dude.
The peanut guy.
Nice. Yeah. And then who invented the hairbrush?
Frederick Douglass.
Frederick Douglass? No.
The salon.
A salon. Yeah.
I don't know this one.
Okay.
Got nothing on that one.
C.J. Walker.
Who invented the 3-light traffic signal?
Great question.
Do you drive to school?
Harriet Tubman.
Nicholas Tesla.
3-light traffic signal. Dr. Seuss.
Okay, so peanut butter would be created by George Washington Carver. In 1920, Carver would attend the United Peanut Association of America convention and show off/produce 145 products, including peanut butter. The hairbrush that most people use? That would be Lyda D. Newman, who received her patent on November 15, 1998. Without her, we'd be all walking around with ratty hair, and that would probably be a new trend. Many of us drive, or at least our parents do, or our bus drivers do, and we can thank Garrett Morgan for making it safer. After watching a horrific car accident because the original traffic light was only stop and go, Morgan made the streets safer by adding a yellow light to slow cars down. African American inventors created things that many of us couldn't live without, things that are as simple as the fountain pen invented by William B. Purvis, or something as big as the video home security system invented by Marie Van Britten Brown. Things to keep us safe and warm like the gas furnace invented by Alice H. Parker. To conclude this jumble that is spilling out of my mouth, without African American inventors, a lot of us wouldn't be able to function on a daily.
The Supreme Court has been a major part of civil rights advancement all throughout United States history, with many cases setting very important precedents for the rights of millions all over the country. When it comes to Black history, the Supreme Court has had tons of rulings that decided the course of progress to civil rights in the 1800s and 1900s. Here are some of the most significant cases and how they impacted racial equality movements. The first major case in the United States for Black history was Dred Scott versus Sanford. Dred Scott and his wife Harriet sued for their freedom in the St. Louis Circuit Court in 1846, stating that they were free due to residence in a free territory, being Wisconsin. However, this case became an over decade-long battle for freedom that appealed from the Supreme Court, where Scott lost, to the Missouri state courts, then to a new federal suit, moving all the way up to the Supreme Court. On March 6, 1857, the court ruled that Scott was not free, as slaves were not citizens of the United States. This decision boosted the issue of slavery in American politics and is one of the most notorious decisions in the court's history. During the era of Reconstruction, civil rights for Black Americans were affirmed by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, along with the Civil Rights Act of 1875 making it a crime for an individual to deny equal enjoyment to many public accommodations. Unfortunately, this act was struck down in 1883 by the courts, along with states codifying racial discrimination at the same time. On June 7, 1892, Homer Plessy, a 7/8 white man, entered a Louisiana railroad system on a white compartment. State law did not view him as a white man, and thus he was arrested. In the criminal district court, Judge John Ferguson ruled against Plessy and his lawyers' argument that the law was unconstitutional. As a result, the case was appealed to the Supreme Court, and in 1896, the court ruled that the law was okay to uphold as the law allowed for equal but separate segregation. The case set the major precedent of legal segregation for nearly 60 years. In one of the most landmark cases in United States history, Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka was the Supreme Court case that ruled unanimously against state-sanctioned segregation of public schools, as it violates the 14th Amendment. Decided on May 17, 1954, the desegregation of public schools was just under 70 years ago to date, showing how relatively recent to modern day these historic cases are. In another decision, just 1 year later, the court ruled that the desegregation plans begin with all deliberate speed. Even more recently, being almost 56 years ago as of June 11th, Loving v. Virginia was the case that struck down the prohibitions of interracial marriages. Richard Loving, a white man, and Mildred Loving, a black woman, were legally married in Washington, D.C., but they moved to Virginia where their marriage was invalid due to it being interracial. They were sentenced to 1 year in prison and appealed this decision to the courts. This was, again, another unanimous decision by the courts, with the majority opinion stating that an individual has the right to marry or not marry, no matter their race. The specific laws in Virginia were seen as meant to preserve racial purity to further white supremacy. This ruling nullified similar prohibition laws of 15 other states. All these Supreme Court rulings were huge deciding factors in civil rights throughout U.S. history, and they all show just how much progress has been made for civil rights over time. But they also show just how recently these events took place, being less than a century ago for many. Modern-day society may seem so disconnected from these cases now, with things being very different, but it's very important to recognize that segregation is only 2 to 3 generations in the past, and civil rights continue to be fought for to this day.
When you hear the word Black Panther, what comes to mind? Our school mascot? The Marvel movie series that starred famous actor Chadwick Boseman? Well, this is not the Black Panthers that I'm talking about. I am talking about the Black Panther group that fought for their civil rights movement throughout the 1960s until the 1980s. They were shown as terrorists, but that was very far from the truth. They were an all-African American group that fought for their economic and political equality for black people. They provided medical clinics for the minorities that wanted to become doctors and free breakfast for the children, especially children in need. The most known member was Fred Hampton. Born and raised in Southside Chicago, he was the national chairman of the Black Panther Party in the Illinois chapter during his lifetime. He also formed many supportive groups such as the First Rainbow Coalition. Fred Hampton wanted to protect his community and Black Panther group from ever being given a bad name like terrorist from the government. Sadly, on December 4th, 1969, Fred Hampton was shot and killed while asleep in his apartment. The FBI handled most of it after the shooting because of everyone split on whether he was a terrorist or a good person trying to help. He was not a terrorist. There were other members who were also shot and killed in their sleep, also figured out by the FBI that they were not terrorists, along with many members who were being charged of attempted murder, armed violence charges, other weapon charges, when most Black Panther members were innocent. The Black Panthers were looked at as terrorists and bad people, but will always be remembered for what they did for the black community.
Rosa Parks played a big role in the end of the Montgomery bus segregation laws. By getting arrested for refusing to give up her seat for white passengers, action began to be taken to fight these unfair bus laws. We've always been taught that Rosa Parks was the first person to give up her seat on a bus and challenge Montgomery bus segregation laws, but that's not necessarily true. 9 months prior to Parks, Claudette Colvin, a 15-year-old black girl, challenged the Montgomery bus laws by refusing to give up her seat for white passengers. She said that she had paid her fare and it was her constitutional right to sit where she was sitting. Because she refused to get up, the authorities were called and she was removed from the bus and arrested on March 2, 1955. She was taken to the police station and charged with violating segregation laws, resisting arrest, and assaulting a police officer, because one police officer got scratched in taking her off the bus. Claudette Colvin was the first person to be arrested for challenging Montgomery bus segregation laws. While she paved the path for the Montgomery bus boycott, it wasn't until after Rosa Parks' arrest that action really started to be taken against bus segregation. The Montgomery bus boycott began on December 5, 1955, just days after Parks' arrest. Why do Claudette's contributions to the end of the Montgomery bus segregation laws go so unrecognized? Well, Claudette, at the time of her arrest, was a minor. Between her age and the fact that just a few months after her arrest she became pregnant, she was not seen as a viable face for the movement. Shortly after her arrest, Claudette moved from Alabama to New York, where she didn't often tell her story. The time between Colvin's and Parks' arrests allowed for the NAACP and political leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. to plan how to go forward. They knew black passengers were important to the bus system, so the boycott would hit hard. While the bus boycott was taking effect, the Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP were challenging segregation laws in court. About a year after her arrest, Colvin was summoned to be one of 4 plaintiffs in the Supreme Court case Browder v. Scale, a court case which challenged the constitutionality of the separate but equal bus segregation laws. On June 5, 1956, the court decided to overturn the bus segregation laws in Alabama because the conditions deprived black bus passengers of equal protections provided under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. So, while Claudette Colvin's actions and contributions tend to go more unnoticed, they still played a pivotal role in the end of the Montgomery bus segregation laws.
Today marks the last day of Black History Month. I was curious to learn what it meant to staff and students around the school. What does Black History Month mean to you?
It just means honoring and celebrating African Americans that came before me and just how they've paved the way for America.
What does Black History Month mean to you?
It means a wonderful opportunity to enjoy and learning history of people who have been underrepresented. It's a golden opportunity to teach students that we're all contributing to the nation and to its history.
What does Black History Month mean to you?
Black History Month for me, I think that we should celebrate Black history all year long, but it is good that there is a specific time to give some awareness to things that we should talk about on a more regular basis. You know, if you have awareness of things, it makes it a more normal thing that you talk about on a more regular basis throughout the year. So like I like the idea of us having some time to kind of say, hey, this should be celebrated all year.
What does Black History Month mean to you?
I think Black History Month means like a contribute to like us black African American people. I think it's a great way to just like symbolize what we've been through in the past, and like it's just a great way to, you know, show out love for some African community.
What does Black History Month mean to you?
I think Black History Month is really great. It's really important. I used to teach African American studies. I'm fascinated by it. There's so much great history that a lot of people don't know and understand. So it's great to have a month to signify that. However, I don't think it should just be limited to 1 month. Like in my world history classes, I want to talk about African Americans all year long. It shouldn't be led to just 1 month. It should be throughout the year, throughout your life.
The biggest takeaway from all these interviews is that it's good that we celebrate it in the month of February, but it should be acknowledged year-round.
Super Bowl 57 hosted the first matchup between black quarterbacks in NFL history, with Jalen Hurts' Eagles taking on Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. But without people like Jim Brown and Jackie Robinson, this matchup might have never happened. Jim Brown started his career at the University of Syracuse, where he received All-American honors in football, lacrosse, and basketball. Jim Brown decided to stick with football and began his NFL career with the Cleveland Browns. Jim Brown quickly became one of the best running backs in football, averaging 100 yards per game, and is only person in NFL history to lead the league in rushing 8 times in a row. He also won MVP 3 times. Jim Brown had a great NFL career, but Jim Brown had to go through a lot considering he played during the peak of the civil rights movement. Jim Brown was heavily discriminated in a league that was dominated by white people. Through all of this, Jim Brown broke down the barriers and became one of the best running backs in the NFL. After his career in football, he decided to become an actor and starred in tons of movies. Even after the NFL, Jim Brown continued his involvement in the civil rights movement by starting a program called the America I Can Project, which talked about the dangers of gang violence and helped relieve areas with gang violence. He also created the Black Economic Union, which is an organization that promoted black entrepreneurship. Jackie Robinson became the first black MLB player in history when general manager Branch Rickey picked Jackie Robinson to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers. It was not easy for Jackie Robinson because he played during the 40s and 50s when America was very segregated. Jackie Robinson faced criticism from everyone, his teammates, fans, other players, other coaches. Every time Jackie Robinson stepped on the field, chants of racial slurs and harmful names came from fans and even the other teams. Jackie sometimes would even get death threats in the mail. Towards the end of the season, the discrimination from fans to Jackie Robinson slowly turned into praise as Jackie Robinson won Rookie of the Year in his first year with the Dodgers. Jackie Robinson continued to dominate throughout his years and eventually won an MVP. After Jackie Robinson retired, he went right into the civil rights movement, joining the NAACP Freedom Fund Drive, and quickly became a board member. Jackie also joined the Youth March for Integrated Schools and Martin Luther King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Jim Brown and Jackie Robinson's contributions on and off the field changed the game of sports and the civil rights movement, and paved the way for many other great black athletes to be able to play professional sports.
Let me ask you a question. Are you prepared to die for your cause? I was acting. Or was I?
Hollywood is such a great sight to see. The number of great actors who have come out to play such great heroes. These stories just fill your heart, with actors such as Johnny Depp, RDJ, and Brad Pitt. But now one man has come from the ensembles of such heroes. With most minority groups being stuck in the background, one man had to stand up for these big names. We know him, we love him, and we all fear him. And honestly, we just know him from his great characters such as Moff Gideon, Gus, and Anston Castillo. That's right, it's Giancarlo Esposito. This man has shown up in several movies and even cameos in video games. This man has done everything from sci-fi and The Mandalorian to dramas such as Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. He's also done an episode in Dear White People, explaining the many racial stereotypes in the U.S. I mean, he has been the face of so many characters for over 55 years in that show business, that he just broke several stereotypes that he talked about to give more African-American actors more light in Hollywood. But it didn't start this way with going to the big leagues of acting. He started as being a background character for the short-lived musical Maggie Flynn. From this moment on, his acting career would slowly get more and more recognized for his acting. Throughout his acting career, he would be nominated for 19 awards, while winning 4 awards. One in 1995 for Best Cast in The Usual Suspects. Another one in 2012 for Best Supporting Actor in a Drama Series in Breaking Bad. More recently, he had won in 2022 as he got Best Supporting Actor in a Broadcast Network or Cable Series drama in Better Call Saul. Finally, his latest award goes to the Best Supporting Actor in a Drama Series, and again in Better Call Saul. This guy's can't be contained to theaters. He's also made a cameo in Far Cry 6 as the main villain, and they got the perfect actor. I mean, I could not visualize anyone else that is more terrifying in that position other than him. With future projects in mind, including Mandalorian Season 3, I am honestly very excited about what Hollywood is planning for this new supervillain.
On the morning of May 30th, 1921, a young black man named Dick Rowland was riding in the elevator in the Drexel building at 3rd and Main with a white woman named Sarah Page. The details of what followed vary from person to person. Accounts of an incident circulated among the city's white community during the day and became more exaggerated with each telling. Tulsa police arrested Rowland the following day and began an investigation. An inflammatory report in the May 31 edition of the Tulsa Tribune spurred a confrontation between black and white armed mobs around the courthouse, where the sheriff and his men had barricaded the top floor to protect Rowland. Shots were fired, and the outnumbered African Americans began retreating to the Greenwood district. In the early morning hours, Greenwood was looted and burned by white rioters. Governor Robinson declared martial law, and the National Guard troops arrived in Tulsa. Guardsmen assisted firemen in putting out fires, took African Americans out of the hands of vigilantes, and imprisoned all black Tulsans not already interned. Over 6,000 people were held at the convention hall and the fairgrounds, some for as long as 8 days. 24 hours after the violence erupted, it ceased. In the wake of violence, 35 blocks lay in charred ruins. More than 800 people were treated for injuries, and contemporary reports of deaths began at 36. Historians now believe there are as many as 300 deaths now. In order to understand the Tulsa race riot, it is important to understand the complexity of the times. Dick Rowland, Sarah Page, and an unknown gunman were at the sparks that ignited the long, smoldering fire. Jim Crow, jealousy, white supremacy, and land lists all played roles leading up to the destruction and loss of life on May 31st, June 1st, 1921. Not one of these criminal acts was then or has been prosecuted or punished by the government at any level, municipal, county, state, or federal. Even after the restoration of the order, it was official policy to release a black detainee only upon the application of a white person, and then only if that white person agreed to accept responsibility for that detainee's subsequent behavior. As private citizens, many white in Tulsa and neighboring communities did extend invaluable assistance to the massacre's victim, and the relief efforts of the American Red Cross provide a model of human behavior at its best. Although city and county government bore much of the cost for Red Cross relief, neither contributed substantially to Greenwood's rebuilding. In fact, municipal authorities acted initially to impede the rebuilding. This event, like other racially motivated travesties, is not well known as it should be. And for whatever reason, it is a piece of American history that has notoriously been left out of the history conversation. At the end of the day, the truth is the truth and the facts are the facts. Learning about events like Tulsa race riots are valuable and should not be brushed over or skipped over. If we forget our history, then we could most likely repeat it, which is a dangerous thought.
During World War I, the 369th Infantry was the first all-black regiment to fight overseas. Better known as the Harlem Hellfighters, the regiment became notorious for their courage and fearlessness on the battlefield. They were stronger and more determined than any other American regiments and saw most frontline action. So here's how it all came together. When war broke out in Europe in 1914, Americans were very reluctant to get involved and remained neutral for the better part of the war. The United States only declared war when Germany renewed its oceanic tax that affected international shipping in April 1917. African Americans who had participated in every military conflict since the inception of the United States enlisted and prepared for involvement. However, many of those who enlisted or were drafted found themselves in non-combative support roles. Many African Americans served under the Services of Supply section of the American Expeditionary Forces. This section comprised of stevedore, labor, and engineer service battalions and companies. The main function of these companies was to support and provide materials to other companies along the front. The notable exception were the soldiers who fought on the front lines in the 92nd and 93rd Infantry Divisions. The 369th Infantry Regiment, known as the Harlem Hellfighters, were assigned to the French Army in April 1918. In this post, the Harlem Hellfighters saw much action, fighting in the Second Battle of Marne, as well as Meuse Argonne offensive. For his valiant and brave actions during World War I, Private Henry Johnson became the first American to receive the Croix de Guerre, and an additional 170 members of the 369th were also awarded the French Medal. The 370th Infantry Regiment, given the name Black Devils by Germans, were also assigned to the French Army. This was the only unit to be commanded by black officers. Corporal Freddie Stowers was a standout soldier among the 371st Infantry. During the Meuse Argonne offensive, Stowers led troops through a German line despite receiving mortal wounds. He was recommended for the Medal of Honor shortly after his death, but it was not processed and awarded until 1991. Like most events from the early 20th century, when the war was over, the Hellfighters returned home. They were not met with the hero's welcome. They were more acclaimed and talked about in Europe and France than the United States. Instead, once the celebrating of the war was over, the Hellfighters went right back to dealing with racism that they had left behind 2 years prior. It took almost 100 years, but eventually the Harlem Hellfighters were honored with an obelisk memorial in New York City and service awards from the U.S. government, including the Distinguished Service Cross. Major Anthony McLean and Sergeant Henry Johnson were honored with the Medal of Honor. After digging into the story, it's clear the Harlem Hellfighters need to be given more time and recognition in our history books.